Hello, and thank you for tuning into Answers from the Lab, where we share Mayo Clinic knowledge and advancements on the state of testing and science from laboratory leaders and the people that are making it happen behind the scenes. I'm Dr. Bobbi Pritt, chair of the Division of Clinical Microbiology at Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota. And with me today is Dr. Bill Morice, the president and CEO of Mayo Clinic Laboratories. Hi, Bill. How are you this week?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Wonderful. I just got back from the American Society of Microbiology microbe meeting. It's our big meeting of the year. And wouldn't you know it, a bunch of people came away from that conference with COVID.
Seriously.
So,
Wow.
yeah, kind of brings up the topics that we've covered in the past, but also that people should know that it is, COVID circulates all times of the year. So, this is sometimes a summertime illness. And it just got me thinking about all the summertime illnesses that people should be looking out for.
Yeah. Yeah. Actually, it's funny. I thought I've been traveling too, and I thought the same thing. It's like, because you get on all like the airport I was in was super busy. Their planes were all super packed. No one's wearing masks or doing the sorts of precautionary things that were, I thought back to traveling 4 years ago, what that looked like versus
Yep.
today. No empty seats, that's for sure on Delta. No sparing in middle seats. So yeah, it's so probably good to be us to be mindful of what's out there, what's circulating.
Yeah, so let's talk about that a little bit to start, and then I want to hear about some of your travels. So, obviously, respiratory viruses, right? If you're on an airplane or in a busy area, think about if someone's sick, and if you're sick, you should be masking, trying to do a little bit of isolation. But then, of course, there's the other things like enteroviruses, that are also spread through respiratory droplets, contaminated surfaces. And then you and I have talked about this quite a bit, all the vector-borne diseases that are out there, Lyme disease, West Nile virus. Um, it's a great time to be out and about. We don't want people having to sit inside, but it's just good to know about what's out there.
Yeah, yeah. So we've talked about the vector-borne illnesses a
Hmm.
lot, and they're super important. And you have your ABCs and everything
Yep.
else, which I try and keep in mind. But well, I mean, what are some other things that people need to be thinking about? Since you just came from microbe, where
Yeah.
microbes are apparently spread.
Right. Yeah. Microbes getting spread at microbe. So, in addition to the respiratory viruses, like I said, there's enterovirus, and that spreads usually during the late summer. And, enteroviruses include scary things like polio, but hopefully we've all been vaccinated against that. But they can also cause a variety of conditions, usually fever, runny nose, and cough, but you can get more severe complications, even a meningitis type presentation. And then there's the non-infectious things like heat-related illness, um, and then food poisoning at the
Mm-hmm.
picnic. Stay away
Yep.
from the potato salad that's been out in the sun all day.
Yep. Yep. Get the Staph aureus toxin in there. That's not
Exactly.
fun to ingest. Yeah,
Bill,
I
I'm
think
I'm impressed that you remembered the Staph aureus toxin. Good for you. We're gonna recruit you yet to be a microbiologist.
as my inner microbiologist speaks out every once in a while. So yeah, I think it's especially now in terms of where we are. We hit the 5 year anniversary of COVID. It's now part of the the collective group of illnesses we need to think about, as you just talked about. But in the summer, there's a lot of group gatherings, and I think just
Hmm.
being mindful of that, some of the best practices, which really have fallen by the wayside, which is not entirely surprising because, uh, but if you're sick, if you can, really think about going to group events, if you feel like you might be sick,
Hmm.
or masking, wearing a mask to protect others, and N95 or equivalent. I mean, these are just things that are, they're just good. And I did notice some people traveling by air that did have masks on, and so that's another thing to think about, particularly if you have concerns around catching something or going someplace this weekend. I'll be driving to see my family in Chicago. My dad has COPD. I probably should have been thinking about that honestly as I was traveling because if he gets a respiratory virus, it can be a life-threatening thing for him. So yeah, I think it's that mindfulness. It's just like wearing a seatbelt or other things. You just have to kind of get in the habit of it,
Hmm.
and unfortunately, not those alarms can be annoying. We don't have anything kind of dinging us when we're not doing these things, but they're just in good things to think about.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's still those rapid COVID tests, and you might want to dust yours off, make sure it hasn't expired. And they can be used. I've had people who tested themselves before going to events if they know they'd been exposed to people who were infected. It's just an additional layer of precaution in addition to wearing a mask.
Yep. Yeah, it's a great point. In fact, I actually just used one recently because I was just was concerned I had a runny nose, and so it was allergy season. It is, so that's what it was. But I did the COVID test just to be sure I wasn't going to be exposing people. And there's other at-home tests too for influenza and other things. So
Yep. Well, speaking of travel and travel related illnesses, I know you've been traveling a lot. I've been traveling a lot, but I'm really curious to hear about some of your recent travels.
yeah, so I don't know. I've been two places, I think, since we last talked. I was in Italy for a European
Nice.
Hematology Association conference. I traveled with my adult son, which was a lot of fun. And then I came back, and then I was at actually an event of I haven't been to before, and it was because it was hosted by TD
Mhm.
Cowen, which is an investment bank, and it was an event bringing together investors and industry leaders in diagnostics and diagnostic tools to just kind of uh, discuss the whole kind of economic environment and investment environment around diagnostic tests and test methodologies, if you will, and technologies. It was very, very interesting. It's just a totally different lens to look at our profession through.
Yeah, I can imagine. We're both physicians and the needs of the patient come first. And that's, what we always think about at Mayo. But healthcare is a business. There is a financial aspect to it. And of course, for some of these diagnostics, there's investors. So what are people talking about?
Well, I mean, first of all, it is interesting that I mean, a lot of these companies they come out of academic institutions or the ideas do, so they really are focused on trying to solve real problems, right?
Hmm.
And I honestly didn't think about it during my time, as signing out cases, but the things that are happening and the technologies that are getting invested in are the ones that end up showing up in our labs, right? That
Yeah.
we want to use or need to understand how to use. And so, but I had never looked that far upstream, honestly. And so it's super interesting, and a few things that came home. Number one is like the investment in those diagnostic tools really does drive a lot of the innovation that we see come into the laboratories, right? So we are part of that ecosystem, even if we're a few steps removed from it. And so when there's changes upstream, we might be at the mouth of the river, but if there's changes upstream, we're going to feel them eventually. And so
Hmm.
that was one of the things that was really intriguing to me. And that is, and we saw this even when we were just talking about like with COVID, there was a huge rush to invest in diagnostics, right? You had companies, a lot of the at-home companies, which kind of sprouted up, like Lumira and others, had investors that came. A lot of that, were people that didn't really understand what you and I talk about a lot. And that's how diagnostics are used in everyday care. And so, and for a variety of different reasons, many of those companies really didn't. They were a bit of what I call COVID mirages, where they looked like they were going to really take off, and it just there hasn't been what people expected. So with that, and then also with the fact that with this blossoming of AI, there's really been a dearth now. It's much more difficult for people with ideas around innovation and diagnostics or diagnostic tools to actually get funding to actually bring those to life, right? So it was kind of a little bit like you wonder if we're going to see a slowing of the pace of innovation that's coming into the labs, or it's going to be very skewed. It's going to, again, massive investment in AI. So I wonder if that's going to be the next wave that we'll be trying to, see coming to at us is all of these AI, agentic AI things you and I have talked about is probably something we need to pay a lot of attention to in the lab industry. Soon, I think sooner rather than later, there's going to be expectations that these tools are introduced into the clinical workflows, and many of them will be pointed at diagnostics. So understanding how they work, understanding how we interact with them, is going to be really important. You and I have talked about that. And then the others is I think we'll see a skewing towards certain things that investors are more confident in. And one of those areas is really the whole idea of the liquid biopsy, essentially blood-based cancer detection, whether it's for diagnosis, screening, or disease monitoring, like MRD. There was a lot of discussion about that still, a lot of interest in from the drug companies that were there in that technology. I think where it will move for us that are in kind of the cancer side of the labs is that the companies that are out there with therapeutics are going to start having acceptable an endpoint of minimal residual disease. So once that starts to happen, that will start really change what the expectation is of a patient and a doctor that's treating them. They're going to want to know it won't be radiology. It's going to be the lab to say, is this patient, you know, that's what's going to drive clinical decision making. And so there's going to be a real probably upswing in people coming to us. And I think oncology is just a start. As you and our department's an expert in. There's the whole topic of microbial metagenomics, which will be out there. I think that's another one that will continue to garner interest.
Interesting. Yeah, it's happening so quickly too. And I think you're right, Bill. AI, large language models, agentic AI. I haven't seen a lot of agentic AI coming into the lab yet, but everyone's talking about generative AI and incorporating it into abilities to have your electronic medical record consolidate records, patient reports for you. I think there's a lot of power there. And then, of course, we're seeing the deep neural networks, convolutional neural networks incorporated into diagnostic algorithms. So this is all happening very quickly.
Yeah, it is. And I think the other area, which will, this has been my career over the last 10 years in lab medicine, has been first the proliferation of technologies like next generation sequencing was the first to generate way more information than an individual could kind of comprehend, where we needed tools on top of those. We've had some tools on top of those, and then we've had people on top of those, bioinformaticians, others, right, that have been difficult to scale. I think that's probably the next real foray of agentic AI is when it can actually solve, and there was discussion of that, right? When you can actually build a function that can actually go in and interpret like large amounts of data coming off of a mass spec in proteomics or coming off a sequencer. I mean, these are things that are probably going to really start to accelerate even more use of those technologies in the clinical laboratory. And I think honestly, where we are as Mayo Clinic, but should really be open to partnerships, right? It's not like it's going to stop. I mean, that was the other theme is like in this environment, companies that are like smaller startup companies maybe need to look for different sorts of partnerships rather than just investors. And does that create opportunities for labs that are forward looking to actually get more deep relationships with these companies and help them understand how to use their technologies in the clinical setting? And which is ultimately what they want, because that's going to be how they get access to patients and grow their companies and bring these things to patients that need them. So I think the upside of that, if there's the silver lining, is keep your ear to the ground for opportunities, because there might be more than there have been in the past.
Yeah, that's a great point and a great note to end on, that there are opportunities. We just have to think differently.
Exactly.
Well, thank you for that great update, Val. It's always interesting to hear what you learn in your travels, different types of travels than mine. Maybe one of
Yeah.
these days I'll tell you what I've learned about intestinal parasites, but maybe we won't touch on that today.
Yeah. So, well, yeah, maybe not today. Time's limited.
Maybe
That'll be
next
down the
time.
road. Yeah.
All
There you
right.
go.
Well, thanks again, Val. Great talking to you as always.
As always, really enjoyed it.
Thank you for tuning in to Answers from the Lab. Be sure to subscribe to this podcast and tune in every other Thursday for new episodes.